Welcome to Inside East African Politics. Today we're taking a close look at a region whose history, I think, really offers a masterclass in shifting power dynamics. Have you ever stopped to think about how deeply the echoes of ancient history can still shape the really dramatic shifts we see today, especially somewhere as dynamic, as complex as East Africa? For one particular area, those shifts have been, well, nothing short of breathtaking.
Absolutely. And that's where our deep dive takes us today into the fascinating and sometimes quite turbulent history of Tigray in Ethiopia.
Tigray, right.
Yeah. We're going to try and unpack the layers of its story. It's quite a story, revealing how a region that once wielded, incredible ancient power now finds itself in a very, very different, often marginalized modern position. It's a compelling example, really, of how profoundly a region's fortunes can change over centuries.
I'm really intrigued by Tigray's story because it seems to illustrate so vividly this whole idea of political volatility and maybe adaptation, too.
Definitely adaptation.
Our goal here, then, is to understand how a region that was once so central, so foundational to Ethiopia's very statehood, finds itself in such a, dramatically different place today. So where do we even begin to unravel this? It feels like such a complex tapestry.
Well, I think if we really want to grasp Tigray's trajectory, its highs and lows, we absolutely have to start at its peak, its absolute zenith.
Okay.
Think of Tigray as the cradle of an empire, specifically the ancient Aksumite kingdom.
Aksum. Right. I've heard of it, of course.
Exactly. This was an incredible power. It was nestled right there strategically at the edge of the Horn of Africa.
Geography was key then.
Oh, massively. It was positioned to control those vital Red Sea trade routes, via ports like Masala and Seb. That location gave it a huge advantage, allowing it to become sort of a bridge between continents.
That sounds like immense power, almost like a forgotten giant in some ways. What were the signs of this, the tangible signs of that wealth and power that we can still understand today? How did Aksum project its influence?
Well, what's truly remarkable is just how vast its wealth and power were. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Right.
And for very good reason.
Right.
During the early medieval era, this wasn't just some regional player. Aksum was a genuine trading colossus.
A trading colossus?
Yeah, think about it. It minted its own gold coins. That's a clear sign of a sophisticated, prosperous economy.
Definitely.
And its caravans, they stretched across continents. We're talking as far as India, the Mediterranean. This wasn't just local wealth. It was an empire shaping the flow of goods and ideas, too, across a huge global network.
Wow.
And you can still see traces. If you visit Aksum today, you'll literally see modern church towers rising right next to ancient stone walls. It's a living reminder right there that Ethiopia's early statehood, its foundation, was centered in that northern region.
So the Aksumite kingdom wasn't just powerful regionally, it was actually fundamental to the whole concept of Ethiopian statehood itself. Can you expand on that a bit? How did it shape Ethiopian statehood for such a long time?
Yeah, that's a crucial point. For more than a millennium, Aksum and its successors there in Tigray were the heart of the Ethiopian state.
A heart.
They established the foundational institutions, the cultural identity, the religious traditions, particularly Christianity, which became central, that would really define Ethiopia for centuries to come. The imperial lineage itself, the Solomonic dynasty narrative, was often tied directly to this northern region.
Okay.
And its historical narratives, its stories, deeply informed the whole idea of a unified Ethiopian empire. So it wasn't just about armies or trade routes. It was about laying the cultural, the political, the ideological bedrock of the nation.
But even a trading colossus, as you called it, couldn't last forever. History shifts. What happened? What was the pivotal change in the 16th century that started to alter Tigray's global standing?
That's right. No empire lasts forever, does it? For Aksum and Tigray, a really significant turning point came in the 16th century. This was the era when European powers, driven by exploration, commerce, all that, they discovered and then mastered the sea route around the Cape of Good Hope to Asia.
Bypassing the old routes.
Exactly. Suddenly, Aksum's merchants, who had absolutely thrived on those overland and Red Sea routes, found themselves increasingly, eclipsed, sidelined on the global stage by these new maritime powers and their direct sea lanes.
So this wasn't just about changing freight routes, was it? It sounds like there were deeper consequences, especially once Ethiopia lost access to the sea itself.
You're right. It connects to a bigger picture. It was much more than just route shifting. By the 1500s, Ethiopia had started losing its grip on its Red Sea coast.
To who?
To encroaching Ottoman forces, primarily. And this action effectively cut off Aksum and Tigray from maritime trade. The consequences were profound.
I can imagine.
As a result, as you'd expect, the region lost status. Its strategic importance just plummeted. And for the next 3 centuries, roughly, Tigray's local rulers found themselves increasingly answering to southern courts, places like Gondar, later Sheba.
So the center of power shifted south.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It marked a really significant shift of Ethiopia's political gravity away from the north, away from Tigray.
It's almost hard to picture a region so central just fading in importance like that. But the story doesn't end there, does it? Despite that long decline, Tigray had a brief but pretty striking revival later on.
It did, yeah. Which shows its resilience, perhaps.
Tell us about Emperor Yohannes IV. How did a native son of Tigray manage to briefly restore a northern capital?
Ah, Yohannes IV. That's a fascinating moment. And it really does highlight Tigray's enduring historical weight, its resonance. Emperor Yohannes, who reigned from 1872 to 1889, was indeed from Tigray.
Okay.
He was quite astute. He capitalized on the weakening of some other regional powers at the time and used his own considerable military skill to briefly restore a northern capital. Not in Aksum itself, but in the Wukromakel area nearby.
So a return to the north, politically.
Yes, albeit briefly. This period, though relatively short in the grand scheme, it really demonstrated that even after centuries of being overshadowed, Tigray's deep historical roots, its formidable warrior traditions, they could still assert themselves. They could briefly reclaim a central role in Ethiopian affairs, a powerful echo of that ancient glory.
Okay, so we've gone from ancient glory, decline, this brief 19th century revival. Let's jump forward. What new forces emerged in the 20th century that would, once again, just dramatically alter Tigray's path?
Right. Now we fast forward to a truly pivotal moment, 1975. This year marks the emergence of a completely new force, one that would fundamentally change Tigray's course again. The Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF.
The TPLF. Okay, I know the name, of course. A guerrilla movement.
Exactly. It started as a Marxist-inspired nationalist guerrilla movement. It gained traction quite quickly within Tigray itself.
And their goal?
Initially, fighting for the self-determination of Tigray. But ultimately, it grew into a struggle to overthrow the military government, the Derg, which had seized power in Ethiopia.
The TPLF's rise seems almost legendary, given the challenges. How did this guerrilla group manage to grow so strong, especially with everything Ethiopia was going through at the time? Famine, the Derg regime.
What's really striking is their sheer tenacity. And frankly, their strategic capability. Throughout the 1980s, they fought this grueling campaign, steadily winning back territory from the Derg regime.
The Derg, that was the military government that overthrew Haile Selassie, right?
Yeah.
Known for being quite brutal.
Extremely brutal, ruled with an iron fist. And this fight was happening during an incredibly difficult period, marked by that catastrophic 1984-85 drought and famine.
A horrific time.
Horrific. And the Derg regime's response, these brutal, forceful resettlement programs that only fueled resistance and probably helped the TPLF gain support.
Right.
So against this backdrop, by 1989, the TPLF had managed to effectively liberate the region of Tigray itself.
Wow.
And then, crucially, they joined forces with other rebel fronts, other movements fighting the Derg. They launched a final offensive, marching into the capital, Addis Ababa, in 1991. And they did it. They ousted the Amhara-dominated Derg regime.
That is a monumental shift in power. A guerrilla movement from the north, marching into the capital, taking over. What happened next? What were the immediate consequences of that victory for Ethiopian politics?
It was, without doubt, seismic. A completely new government was installed, and this new government was essentially led by Tigray leaders.
Right, Meles Zenawi became prime minister.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Meles Zenawi, a key Tigrayan commander in the TPLF, became prime minister. And this ushered in a period of, well, nearly 3 decades, from 91 right up to 2018, where the TPLF really dominated Ethiopian politics.
Dominated.
Yes. Tigrayan elites held many, many of the most senior posts in government, in the military. Now, this era was complex. You saw significant economic development. Ethiopia's international profile grew. A more federalized political structure was put in place.
There's always a but, isn't there?
But yes, it also came with considerable controversy. Critics, especially from other large ethnic groups like the Oromo and Amhara, often charged the ruling coalition with ethnic favoritism.
Favoring Tigrayans.
The argument was that Tigrayans disproportionately benefited from power and resources, even as Addis Ababa was, becoming a major diplomatic hub. So, progress alongside resentment.
Okay, so this period of TPLF dominance, almost 30 years, but it didn't last. What happened in 2018? What marked that turning point leading to this dramatic reversal we hinted at?
Yes, 2018, another huge turning point.
Yeah.
What happened was widespread, sustained protests, particularly among the Oromo and Amhara communities.
The groups who felt marginalized.
Exactly. They felt marginalized by the TPLF-dominated coalition, the EPRDF. This unrest reached a critical point, a boiling point really, and it ultimately led to a change at the top. Abiy Ahmed, who is Oromo, was appointed prime minister.
And Abiy was seen as a reformer initially.
Very much so. Hailed as a reformer. And he moved very swiftly, very decisively to dismantle the TPLF's entrenched power structure.
How? How did he manage that so quickly, after decades of TPLF influence being so deeply ingrained?
He took several quite calculated actions almost immediately.
Yeah.
Within months, top TPLF officials were out, removed from key security posts, key government positions.
A clean sweep.
Pretty much. Political restrictions were lifted across the board, which initially won him praise, and then he moved to rebrand the ruling alliance itself, trying to merge the ethnically based parties, including the TPLF, into a new single prosperity party.
Which the TPLF resisted.
They did. But another really landmark move was Abiy's peace deal with Eritrea in 2018.
Ending that long frozen conflict.
Exactly. Ending a 2-decade standoff. Now, this was significant because Eritrea, under Isaias Afwerki, had been a major adversary of the TPLF during the border war back in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Right.
So this peace deal, quite unexpectedly, had the effect of isolating the TPLF from national politics. It removed a potential regional counterweight, or maybe even ally, depending on how things shifted.
The unintended consequence, maybe.
Perhaps. But the stage was truly set for conflict when the TPLF flatly refused to join Abiy's new Prosperity Party. And then, in what was seen as an act of defiance, they went ahead and held their own delayed regional election in late 2020 against the federal government's orders.
And that defiance, that unfortunately led straight to war, didn't it? November 2020. What was the spark? How did it unfold?
Regrettably, yes. The standoff tipped into open civil war in November 2020. The federal government launched a military offensive, a major one, into Tigray. The stated reason was accusing the TPLF of attacking a federal military base within Tigray.
Okay.
What followed was just devastating. 2 years of brutal fighting. The conflict was incredibly harsh. International observers, humanitarian groups, they reported widespread atrocities, ethnic violence, a severe humanitarian catastrophe unfolding across the region, mass displacement, famine-like conditions.
Just awful.
Truly awful. By late 2022, Abiy's federal forces, crucially, with significant support from Eritrean troops who crossed the border.
Eritrea got involved directly.
Heavily involved. They had managed to retake most of the region, including major towns.
And how did this terrible chapter finally end? Or at least the major fighting? What was the immediate aftermath for Tigray?
The major hostilities, the large-scale battles, largely ceased with the Pretoria Agreement, signed in November 2022 in South Africa.
The Pretoria Agreement.
Yes. But, as various analysts and reports made clear, the war left Tigray in ruins. Infrastructure decimated, the economy shattered, the population deeply traumatized and suffering.
And the political settlement.
The agreement stipulated that Mekelle, Tigray's regional capital, would be turned over to the federal government. It essentially placed Tigray under federal administration. And the human cost, it's staggering. Reports estimate casualties potentially reaching up to hundreds of thousands, soldiers, civilians.
Yes.
It's a profound tragedy for the region.
Hundreds of thousands. So bringing this right up to today, maybe the last year or two, 2023 into 2025. The contrast is just so stark, isn't it? From ancient centrality, cradle of empire, to this current profoundly peripheral political status. What does that actually look like on the ground now?
It is incredibly stark.
Yeah.
Mekelle, the capital, is now firmly under federal administration. The TPLF, the party that for decades was not just legal but dominated national politics, has been systematically stripped of its status. And then in a really impactful move, just recently, in May 2025, Ethiopia's election commission announced that TPLF was formally banned from any political activity.
Banned completely.
Banned completely ahead of the next national vote. Many of the TPLF's former senior leaders, those who weren't killed or captured, remain either in exile abroad or essentially in hiding within Ethiopia. They're effectively removed from the domestic political scene.
So the reversal is total, from ruling party to effectively outlaw status. And Tigray's role, its influence in Addis Ababa's corridors of power has been dramatically reduced. It's just an incredible turn of fortune, a complete inversion almost of its historical prominence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's precisely it. The region that, as we discussed, once defined Ethiopian statehood for so long, now finds itself largely excluded from its central political processes, marginalized.
When you step back and look at the whole sweep of history we've covered in this deep dive, it is such a stark contrast. A province that once shaped Ethiopian statehood for more than a millennium, as you said, is now rebuilding amidst profound political uncertainty. It's undergone this unbelievable reversal from empire to insurgency, back to power, and now to exile and marginalization.
And I think what Tigray's story really illustrates quite vividly is not just the inherent volatility in nation-building processes, especially in diverse states, but how even a region with incredibly deep historical centrality can be, well, systematically marginalized through geopolitical shifts, like the trade routes, but also through intense internal power struggles.
Right.
It serves as a really powerful reminder, I think, that historical prominence is absolutely no guarantee against political reversals. And that calls for national unity, which you hear often, can sometimes mask these deeper, often unresolved ethnic and regional tensions simmering beneath the surface.
So as we wrap up, maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to take away. As you reflect on Tigray's incredible journey from ancient empire to sidelined province, what does its story tell us about the resilience of communities, about the constantly shifting sands of political power and allegiances, and maybe about the ongoing, very complex challenge of forging national unity in diverse nations? Keep learning, keep exploring.